Okay, we want to welcome everybody to the seminar today. We're starting late because the service was kind of had a lot more activity than usual, so we appreciate you waiting. The good news is there's no service after this, so we can still have an hour for the seminar. This is being done live by Zoom, so we don't have the traditional ability of the people watching to be seen, but we will ask those of you from a distance to put your questions or share maybe a little bit of your story in a sentence or two by the chat, and I will relate that to Sandy as we go through this, because she would like this to be an interactive process. We are taping it, so for those that want to watch it a second time or tell a friend about it, that they could watch it once it gets uploaded to the church website. So the topic today is relevant to All Saints Day. For those of us all of us that have lost people, and there's this question of is there something after life? Is this it? At least for me, having experienced various people in my life, I feel the presence oftentimes. Turn a corner, I feel the presence of my parents, for example. It just occurred to me this week that my dad was here for the last 2.5 years and was often in our house, and his carbon's still in my trees. When he breathes out CO2, the trees pick it up, and I still have part of that in my trees. So without saying any more, Sandy's title is When the Veil Between Heaven and Earth is Wafer Thin. Okay. My mask apparently can't hear well, but I'll read the title again. When the veil between heaven and earth is wafer thin, it certainly comes from this concept in Celtic Christianity. So, Sandy?
I'm told if I stay back here, I don't have to wear my mask. So that's a treat. Welcome to those of you who are here in person today and to those of you who are live streaming. I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm very grateful to the Adult Seminar Committee for inviting me to share this morning. Today, which we know as Halloween, was in ancient Celtic times known as All Hallows Eve. And the word hallow, H-A-L-L-O-W, means to honor as holy, as in hallowed be thy name in the Lord's Prayer. And in ancient times, hallow was also the actual word for a saint or a holy person. So when Christianity spread, it quite often absorbed part of the indigenous cultures and religions that it encountered, shaping them to become part of the whole tradition. And so the Celtic All Hallows Eve, which was exactly at this time of year, and it was time to remember those we love who had died, became in Christianity All Saints Eve. And the following day in early Catholic tradition was called Hallow Mass. And in medieval England, I learned, the days from October 31st to November 2nd were called All Hallows Tide. So we are in that time, that sacred time of the year. I think I need to speak louder.
Can you move it a little closer?
Just move it a little closer. There we go. At some point, Hallows Eve in our culture became Halloween, and Hallow Mass became All Saints Day. So today, as we reflect on the ways and times that we have sensed or felt the presence of those dear to us who have died, we honor the heritage of these Celtic ancestors. And they did indeed believe that at this time of year, the separation between heaven and earth is especially wafer thin. That was the way they described it. And that the souls of our loved ones and friends are particularly close to us, close to the earth and accessible during this week. In ancient Celtic tradition, people would gather around a bonfire on All Hallows Eve, and they would share memories and feelings and stories of their loved ones who had died around that fire in the evening. And when all the stories were told and the fire had turned to embers, each family would take some of those glowing embers back to their own hearth. In the same spirit, we come together on All Saints' Day and we light candles to remember those we love. And I'm going to tell you a little more about this candle later. We come together now to remember those people who are dear to us, who have been dear to us, and we can take this opportunity to intentionally bring ourselves into that luminous, wafer-thin place during All Hallows Week for us. Now, the Irish poet and priest John O'Donoghue writes in words that you may have heard used in memorial services, and I think they're especially important to us in this time. He writes, "Let us not look for our loved ones only in memory, where we would grow lonely without them. Instead, let us find our loved ones in their presence, beside us when beauty brightens, when kindness grows, in music, in flowers, in moments of light." And I believe that's true. I believe that we can find their presence in those ways and in dreams and meditation, in prayers, in both ordinary and extraordinary moments of grace. So I'm going to start off with sharing an experience that I've had, and then I'll call on some people here who have something they'd like to share about a way you may have experienced the presence in some way of a loved one who's died. And I remind us that our time is somewhat limited. We will go an hour and then come to a close. And then if anybody wants to stay and chat a little, we can do that as well. So when my father died, it was very much a shock. It was not expected. More shocking than that for me was trying to sort out his finances and bills. He had always controlled the finances in our family without involving or talking to my mother about it in any way. So when I went through his desk, I discovered too many credit cards, all at their limits, too many bills, too many debts, loans, things unpaid and delayed. It looked like a financial disaster. And as I created a plan to pay off all these bills within 2 to 3 years, I also had to teach my mother how to write a check, how to pay a bill. And in that process, I became so angry with my father that anger shut off my grief. A few months later, I had this dream. In my dream, I'm standing on a shore and I see a huge, dark, gray sailboat with dark flags flying, coming straight toward me, fast over the water. And my father is standing on the bow of this boat with his arms stretched out. And I was so angry and furious with him that I screamed and I screamed and I screamed. And Larry woke me up and I was still screaming. So real it seemed. Several years went by. And on the last Sunday in October, about a year and a half after this dream, I was here in church at the worship service, and it was All Saints Sunday. And we were singing as the closing hymn, what turned out to be my father's favorite hymn. And I couldn't sing it. I just burst into tears and stood there crying. And that night, I had another dream. And I dreamed that I was walking down a sidewalk on the back side of an apartment complex that was facing a lake. And there was a bridge going from the sidewalk over to a dock that went out into the lake. And standing on the dock was my father. And he was holding the ropes of a very small motorboat. And I don't know if he actually spoke to me in the dream or if I just intuited it. But he seemed remorseful. I felt that he was feeling sorry in some way. I felt that he was reaching out to me. And so I offered my hand, and he took my hand, and he helped me get on this little boat. And we rowed quietly and calmly around the lake. And I felt that dream was a real moment of healing for me. A moment I could remember the parts of him that had been obscured by all my anger. And there's no question in my mind that these three events, these two dreams interrupted by that singing of the hymn, were in fact some sort of visitation of my father's spirit. And that over that time, I was able to heal my anger and to make some peace. So when people ask me if I believe there can be forgiveness and healing after death, I would have to say yes, there can be. So we have time, and I invite you, if there are times you have had an experience, a sense of presence, whatever you would like to share, we have time to do that. So Amanda, you probably need to stand up.
Okay.
And,
Right.
yeah,
From the camera.
you're fine right here.
Okay.
Just sort of turn around.
Right, yeah, from last time.
You can. I'll move over a little.
So,
Oh, that microphone, so, I'm sorry, that one.
okay, this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So, a few years ago, my dad, was, had like a heart attack, and he was in the hospital, and it was very sudden, and he, was in the hospital only 3 weeks, and he had another heart attack and, in the hospital, and it basically left him, the blood, the blood didn't get to his brain for a few seconds. And so, and this has happened to me twice after this experience that I had. It happened to me again with two other people, not related to me. But 5 days before he died, I had a dream, and in the dream, it was my sister and my brother, and I have another brother, but he wasn't in the dream for some reason. And along came my dad. He was dressed all in white. And my dad was a theater person. We're like, Dad, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in a hospital. Why, what's going on? He's like, I'm great. He was smiling from ear to ear. And he was, again, dressed all in white, so bright. And I knew, and then 5 days later, he died. And I felt like his soul had already passed on before his body did. He was just letting me know that he was all right. Thanks.
You can come to the mic or you can stand up and talk really loud.
Ann Taylor, I lost both parents a few years ago. My mom visits once in a while, really nice visits from her. This happens a lot in our family. And then my favorite aunt died a couple of years ago, and she came to me in a dream and said, I count you as one of my own, and that just meant everything to me. She had 7 kids of her own, and yet she counted me. And then I helped an ex-boyfriend this past
Recording stopped.
I think I'm a fairly concrete person, so dreams sometimes are difficult for me. I either don't have them or don't remember them or can't find any meaning in them. But one of the things that my mother died on New Year's Eve this past at 99. I guess it was a timely death. And my father had died about 8 years ago, also in his 90s. But one of the things that we did as a threesome, because my sisters were older, and my memories of most of this is after they had left home, would be to camp and fish. And my dad had an old Coleman camp stove that some of you probably have seen. And this was when I was a little boy, so probably 60 years ago or so. At some point, he gave it to my son. And I went camping this past week, and my son said, "Take that stove." And it's barely got any color to it except rust now. And I cooked on that stove. And just in that concrete thing, it allowed me to connect with them and things I love both about them and our time together.
My mother died about 10 years ago at 94, and for about 3 years before she died, she would say, "I don't know if I'm going to make it through the day, so I wanted to say goodbye to you now." So we said goodbye many, many times over those 3 years. She had a dream a few years before she died that she was walking in green pastures and there was millions of people up on the hill. And out of those many, many people, her brother, who has previously passed, came to greet her and take her with him. And she was very comforted by that. She was an atheist, so she had a lot of struggle near the end with going because she's afraid that would be it. But after that dream, she was very at ease. And later, after she died, I had a dream of her, and the dream took place in the 70s at our home when I was a kid, and she was in her 40s, and she had her bag and her outfit that she wore in the 70s, and she goes, "Allison, let's go shopping. We need to go to Target and get some stuff for you," which is what she used to say to me. And I wasn't necessarily a kid. I didn't see myself, but I said, "Mom, but you're gone now. You're dead. You don't have any money." And she's like, "Oh," and that was that dream thing.
Well, my good friend and mentor, Gerald May, was in the hospital dying, and he had a blog that followed it bit by bit. And one time, at one day, his son came on and said, "Gerald has died." And so I sat in quietness, giving thanks for his life, which had been extraordinary and had touched me greatly. And I got an image of him. And so I sort of looked at that image and I said, "Gerald, what's it like to be dead?" And there was this tremendous smile that went on his face that was just all encompassing and glowed. And that was my answer.
My attention to dreams would be familiar to Sandy, where we used to meet at our home in Archer. We actually invited Jeremy Taylor to come, you will remember. He was a very well-known person in quote the dream business from California. And I don't get dreams often. Um, I have been, let's say, the subject or the participant in recurring noxious dreams over many years that were not pleasant. Those are not prominent in this time. I lost Ruth just a year ago, 4 days plus. She wanted to be cremated, that was her instruction. And we waited and waited to try to get that accomplished and then go and pick up the ashes that we would come to bring back and hold for us another time when they would be buried. And on that day, I had a friend, Margaret Jones, who drove with me down to the funeral home near Ocala and picked up the ashes and brought them back. She was someone who introduced me to Celtic Christianity by giving me some beautiful CDs with chanting from John Philip Newell, who's a well-known person in that domain. And something was unleashed by that particular set of circumstances. So as I was learning some of these chants and performing them, which I often do at the Live Oak Sangha, which is a virtual production that Mark Burlingame does, and I'm a member of that Sangha. And I was doing the walking meditation at that time. This was about 2 months after Ruth died. I suddenly found myself for the first time in conversation with her, a one-sided conversation. But absolutely everything opened up. Now, this was conscious. I was walking and I was aware of it. And I'd had a 5-minute soliloquy expressing everything that I had experienced and every bit of love that I could remember and express during that time. It's just like suddenly something unlocked. I was quite moved by that and thought this is highly unusual. Later that night, I had a dream. I don't usually dream about specific people or with the details of specific features, but this was so extraordinary that I would share it with you. Ruth, I hope it's all right. I was in a room by myself, not sure quite where it was, and the door opened, and Ruth walked in the door dressed entirely in a very, very beautiful red coat down to her knees with a red scarf trailing back. Walked up to me, kissed me on the lips. I went back and looked at her, and she kissed me a second time, gave me a squeeze, turned around and walked out the door. The end. Needless to say, I was completely amazed because it was, I think, one of the most detailed and, as far as remembrance goes, dream that I've ever had. It's with me yet. And yeah, that's what I would share.
Just the other day, I was rifling through the cookbooks in our shelf, trying to find a recipe I wanted to make. And just the other day, I was rifling through our cookbooks in a shelf because I wanted to make a recipe I hadn't in a while. And a little book of postcards, you can buy a book that you tear off and send, fell out. And I opened it up, and my mother-in-law had given it to me years ago.
and written a note, happy day. Maybe you can send these postcards to friends to let them know about your new garden. And I just planted a new garden a few days before, and I don't often hear directly from my mother-in-law. She died almost 18 years ago. And it was like she had just spoken to me again. It was really special. And I wonder, for the family I married into, this is my mother-in-law, the family I married into, she was really the person who kept the family together. And she's missed so many ways.
Thank you all, everybody, for sharing this. That brings back so much. My dad died when he was 62 years old. He had been diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer when he was 58. And I was about 34 years old at the time. It was a very difficult experience. And 6 weeks after he died in July, and this was in September, I had a dream that I found him at a flea market. Before he died on a farm in Pennsylvania, he had collected antique tools. And he'd always said, and this is in non-dream life and waking life, that he would like to, in retirement, have a table and buy and sell antique tools, big old chisels and things like that. And I found him at the flea market with his table of tools. And I went and ran and got my mother and said, look, I found Dad. And she came and she was so excited to see him and said, I missed you so much. You can come with us now. And he said, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. You can go ahead, but I'm good. And that was a powerful visitation. And I remember sharing that again with my mother as she was dying at age 80. It was a comfort in the visitation.
I haven't had the dreams. The COVID recess gave me an opportunity to go through documents, photographs, such that have accumulated from the family. And I learned a bit about the stories that are back there. And I have, during the meditation times, I've been visited by each of my grandparents and parents. And I want to try to keep these people alive in a way by remembering their stories and perhaps being able to tell their stories. And so that I'd like to, in the throes of putting together these stories and how they turned out the way they did and why they did some of the things they did. And it felt particularly close today. Thank you. One thought I had as I reflected on our sharing is that we can have places that we can go to that help us remember. Different people might might go to a grave site. In my case, both of my parents' ashes were spread in our favorite fishing place in Gunnison, Colorado. My mother proceeded, and that's where she wanted her ashes spread. She was a fisher person. She often waded out in a swift stream, the Taylor River, and fished off this huge rock that's big enough for 4 men to be on it. And so when she died, my 3 brothers and I waded out and spread her ashes from that rock. And my dad, who outlived her by 10 years to our surprise, said that he would like his ashes spread the same place. And I've told my children that I'd like my ashes spread from this rock. Well, I was just back there about 3 weeks ago with my son, who's a Methodist preacher, and just the 2 of us spent a week together trout fishing and remembering. And there's just something so powerful to have a place where you go back with, as Bill talked about, the stories and telling the stories of mom and dad and laughing, sometimes teared up. So those, for me, it's one of those things in Celtic Christianity called pin place.
My mother is still alive, 102. I talked with her yesterday, and she was all thrilled with all the activities that she's doing in the museum. I become very comfortable with God. Now that I've been on the mechanic, I've had opportunities to be with people. The one woman in particular, lost her daughter, young, with cystic fibrosis. Then she lost her husband, and she's 94, and she wanted to die. And when I first started going to see her regularly, she said, "Well, Deborah, I just want to die." And so I got up and I sat down and I said, "I'm Dr. Kevorkian. Now you tell me why I should let you die." Kind of convinced her. But then she did decline, and she had heart issues. So we had a lot of opportunities to talk about it. And she told me that her daughter brought one of my sunshine. And I never felt her favorite. And so as she became comatose, I would go and sing to her, and I could tell she could hear me. And then the social worker and the nurse who was attending to her, they also would chime in. So the 3 of us came to her. And then the day she passed, I went there in the morning and they said, this is her day. She's going to pass. And I said, gosh, I have to go to an appointment, but I'll do that when I come back. She had passed. But they have left her body all in the bed, all fixed. She had children who were in this area and they were around, but they had saved her, saved her body. And the thing,
Thank you for your sharing. Very powerful and moving, I think, for all of us. Appreciate that. I wanted to also just share with you that in Jewish tradition, there are some very wonderful ways of remembrance for our loved ones who have died. And there are 2 important ones. And I talked a little bit to Risa George about this, so she was helpful. In Jewish law, for a period of time after a loved one dies, you wear a black ribbon that is torn. And so when you wear that ribbon, everyone knows that you are grieving. and you can tell your story. And I can remember um, in both of the deaths of my parents, standing in line at Publix and wanting to tell the cashier, my mother just died. So I really think that that is a kind of a neat thing. To have some way that's visible that people may know you're grieving, because I wanted to tell the story. So I like that is a part of Jewish tradition. And then on the anniversary day of the death, after the first year, well, actually every year, you light a special memorial candle. That's what it looks like. And I discovered they sell these at Publix in the International Food Department. You go near the matzah, and there they are. And these candles burn for 24 hours so that I can light a candle on the anniversary of my mother's death, and it'll burn for 24 hours safely. Or I can do it on All Saints Day, or I can do it on my mother's birthday. So it helps me to have some specific times during the year when I can remember in a very intentional way. So, but in Jewish tradition, you have to wait a year before you light the candle on the anniversary of the death, because it is believed that the loved one's spirit stays right with you that first year, and lighting the candle on the anniversary, the first anniversary of the death, releases the spirit and releases you. Lisa says that as soon as she lit the candle on the 1-year anniversary of her mother's death, she felt as though a huge weight had been lifted. And so I recommend this. They're very inexpensive, and there they are, right? Who knew? Right on the shelves at Publix. Because I always lit candles, but then I was afraid to leave the house with them burning, and then I'd forget to light it again when I came back on. So this is a cool thing. Any other comments or thoughts or questions? Well, it's been a very meaningful experience for me, and I do feel like this time of the year is a very special time of being aware of this and honoring it. So I thought that we would close with a Jewish prayer of remembrance, and you've probably heard this if you've been to any of the All Saints Church services here. And it's very simple. I will read a line, and then your part is to say, we remember them. And John is going to cue you in on that, okay? So this is our prayer. In the rising of the sun and its going down,
We remember them.
in the sound of the wind and in the chill of winter, in the opening of buds and the rebirth of spring,
We remember them.
in the blue of the sky and the warmth of the summer, in the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn,
We remember them.
when we are weary and in need of strength, when we are lost and sick at heart,
We remember them.
when we are filled with laughter and joy, and when the year ends and when it begins.
We remember them.
They live on in us and beyond us, for they are a part of us always as.
We remember them.
Happy All Hallows Eve. Thank you.